Welcome to the Houston HFES Virtual Early Career Panel. My name is Tyler Duke, and I will be moderating this session. Due to technical difficulties, the first question we asked our panel has been cut off of this video. They were asked about their internship, co-op, and postdoctoral research positions. Here is a quick look at where our panelists held these positions. For more information, please feel free to reach out and connect with them through LinkedIn. Please enjoy the rest of the video. No, that's awesome. I think all of those experiences are important, and I think that you've all provided a lot of great information for us transitioning to those full-time experiences of those jobs. And on top of that, right, now that you're working, are there any knowledge gaps or like skills that you wish you had learned to better prepare you for these occupations? We'll start with Danny.
Why me? No, I'm just kidding. Um,
Luck of the draw.
I wish I had come to my current position with a clearer set of guidelines in terms of research ethics. I wish I had known my own ethical boundaries ahead of time. And I know that sounds weird. So let me just give you an example. Within the first 3 months at my current position, I was asked to conduct interviews with managers. I was testing a system that was supposed to help these managers assess their team's performance, but to be completely transparent, the system was awful. It did not meet expectations. It was even more work for the managers than it was helpful to them. The main stakeholder, a higher manager who had the idea for the system, knew all of these managers and the managers knew him. They had a good business relation, but you could feel the hierarchical kind of tension. The ethical controversy starts when, after a couple of interviews, the stakeholder asked me to give him some feedback because they had to move fast for the development of the system, and all the feedback was negative to the point that it was like a showstopper. So a stakeholder tells me that he wants to observe the interviews, and this is where I struggled ethically because on the one hand I was just new. Uh, you know, I was terrified. I wanted to impress the stakeholder. I wanted to um, make him happy because that's it's a higher manager and you're there and you're new and you just feel this pressure. But on the other hand, I had a bunch of managers that have a direct relationship with this stakeholder who is their higher manager. So if the stakeholder was in those interviews, two things could happen. The managers will not speak freely and completely change their opinion to favor the system, or the stakeholder will, well, hear the managers destroying his idea, which then may result in unnecessary tensions. So I struggled there. And I had, research ethics classes and courses, during school, but I guess it never prepares you enough because, sometimes you just have a couple of slides on research ethics and that's it. I mean, maybe you get it on the test, but that's that. And I think everyone that is moving from academia, like to your first job, especially in research, you need to start asking yourself what your research boundaries are, what your ethical boundaries are. Um, so, well, anyways, in the end, I explained to the stakeholder that the results will be compromised if he was to be there at the interviews, and I also told him that I will not provide him with the names of my participants. But like I said, I was just terrified, just basically telling a higher manager that you're trying basically to impress, that you're not gonna do what he wants, and especially that you're not gonna even disclose the name of your participants because you want to make sure that you protect them as well, was really a test for me. And I wish I had more experience or some more talk, or I sincerely don't know what the school and could provide us, but I feel like I was lacking a little bit there. Obviously, I was able to reach to that conclusion, but it took me a while. It took me a while to kind of get there, and feel like I had the right, like I did the right decision. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, I see you nodding your head, Trey, which might be an agreement. Do you want to expand on that, or maybe bring some more gaps that you might have had?
Well, I will say that wasn't, in my case, that wasn't the gap. That was something I did pick up through my classes, particularly because we had a lot of hands-on project stuff, but that was also the sort of thing that they hammered into our heads. Particularly with our engineering background, our program's very big at establishing you're supposed to be doing engineering, you're supposed to be an agent for the public and for the people you're dealing with. Your job is to protect the people that you're gathering information from. And if you can't do that, you're going to damage your credibility. You're going to damage the reliability of your research. You're going to damage people. Don't do it. So in some ways, what I was told to do in that situation is tell them, frankly, these people, we need people to tell us how ugly your baby is. And the reason why I'm doing it is because you can't sit down and ask these people directly and get an honest answer, because it will make them uncomfortable. It will make you uncomfortable. You don't want to be in the room. My goal is to get them to go there and be as mean about everything possible, every single flaw that could possibly happen in this system. Maybe it's not all accurate, but there's going to be a lot of smoke and it's going to make you unhappy. Just don't do it. That's my job. But what I can say from the actual question, though, is that the things that have been most useful or gaps have been, one, visual design. One of the things is we'll have to deal with people who are visual thinkers and visual learners or what have you, right? Some of you guys who have more visual backgrounds do a really good job with that, but then have to learn the math. If you're coming from the engineering side, you have to learn to speak visually so somebody can understand you. And I'm at a fairly small company on the scope, so that whole having to learn 15 different skills, frequently within my group, I end up being the person who has any visual design experience whatsoever, so I have to pull something together. Learning to get good at doing that very quickly is an interesting challenge, but visual design is really key. The other thing I can say is modeling, statistical modeling, knowing why you would pick a different model, why would you would use it, and machine learning goes into this. I don't distinguish between classic statistical modeling and machine learning at all. They're just different methods. But by the end of the day, when you're looking at a bunch of data, the ability to say, I need to use this kind of ability to find a difference between these things, because you're looking at two different types of questions. How do you build a model to describe to somebody else? Because if you have numbers, you need to be able to tell a story. And you need to tell a credible story, not just a wizard did it and here's the pattern that came out of it. You need to be able to look down into it and say, here's what the insight is, and here's what it buys you, and here's what it buys your customers. Because if you can't show, like, it's the basic case. If you've got a body out on, if you've got somebody coming into an emergency room, right? You're doing triage. You're trying to make sure they're not going to die on the table. You're trying to make sure that things are stable. But the main thing is, if they're bleeding, you need to know where they're bleeding. You need to figure out where it's wrong. And very frequently when you come down to the numbers and the modeling, it's, okay, I need to show you every place that's causing a problem in a way that's authoritative. But if you spend your time wondering how to sift it and trying to figure out what you're doing, you get lost. So visual design, modeling, and of course, ethics are always absolutely paramount. If you don't have those, you got nothing to stand on.
Great points. I'll go to Maya.
So I think for me, the biggest gap that I had was knowing how to speak with non-scientists. So again, I come from a very academic program where you do your research, you write a 10-page paper that you publish, and everybody wants to know about your methods, and they want to like ask you questions about that and really kind of dig into it. But at NASA, and especially at Facebook, most of my conversations are with non-scientists. And so I have to be able to communicate the research results to my PM and my designer and some engineers and a data scientist in a way that actually resonates with them. So they don't care about the statistical analysis that I did. They don't even really care about like the specific outcome. They want to know how that translates to a product implications. And here's my cat again. You're going to see her a few times throughout this thing. She's very happy that we're working home, by the way. She's going to be devastated. So that's really, I think, the biggest gap that I had was how to translate research results from science speak to real person speak to product speak, because all those things are different.
No, totally. I think like it's like almost like speaking different languages almost, right? Like communicating with all these different members of the team in different ways. So I think I definitely agree with that. We'll move to Danae.
Okay, there we go. Could not unmute. So I pretty much want to echo what everybody else has said for the most part, especially with what Trey was saying with visual design and being able to kind of communicate in different ways. So I guess the one thing I would add is, for me in tech at least, and non like mission critical tech, so not the drones or the robotic stuff or any kind of medical devices, but for general just like UX things, it was really difficult for me to kind of lose my academic research rigor in lieu of like this kind of, we need a good enough answer to be able to do like really quick or fast research. So I struggled with that a lot, and it kind of made me feel like less of a researcher, less of a human factors engineer, like all of these kinds of things. And so it took a little while for me to like talk to other researchers who had similar backgrounds and things like that to kind of understand that this is actually okay. Sometimes like we just need to understand when having 80% confidence in our results is actually good enough or better or worth the time trade-off than having 95% confidence in it. So I would definitely look into that, especially if you're thinking about going into something that's like a little less mission critical with human factors. But yeah, it took a while. It's something I still struggle with. And secondly is just trying to, I guess this actually is the same thing as what Maya was saying, but learning how to communicate with non-scientists and understanding that people don't know everything or any kind of like reasoning behind what you're saying. So like, of course, talking to a room full of like human factors students, like you would know why like you should not have red text on a background. It's like not easy to read. But when talking to a room full of like, I don't know, engineers, designers, product managers, it's not that obvious. And so it's really difficult, or it was difficult for me to kind of take a step back, figure out why I'm saying something, what is the proof behind what I'm saying, to be able to convey that to someone else and not take anything or any kind of like, not dispute, but just kind of like people asking questions or debating with me or whatever with a grain of salt, and not them not believing in me or believing in my expertise, but just that like, you know, sometimes like they don't know what I know. So I have to do that.
Okay, it's awesome. And I'm gonna go ahead for time's sake, move on to the next question. Talking about, I know we've already touched on it briefly, but talking about networking and the importance of it leads us to, you know, did you attend any conferences? Do you attend them now? And how important are they? How important were they then? And how important are they now for you? So in thinking about that, I guess we'll start with Maria.
So actually, I didn't go to a ton of conferences when I was in school, and that's something I'd probably recommend people doing. Considering I moved from Michigan to Texas, I didn't really know anyone here. And when you're looking for a job and you don't know anyone to kind of even reach out to and like put feelers out to or ask for advice, like in that area, it's kind of tough. Luckily, I was like very lucky to find two amazing ladies at End to End, Christy Harper and Monica Sneidman, who ended up being like some really great role models in this field for me. But Yeah, like when I got here, I was very not, like I knew people in Pennsylvania and I knew people in Michigan, and that was never where I intended to be. So I had kind of dug myself in a hole by not going to those conferences. In my professional career, though, I have been going to conferences, and I do definitely see the benefit. I've already met a bunch of people. You've already, like, it's fun to be able to get to talk about like your field and like what you're doing and like your research, and it's really like fun to hear about what other people are doing as well, and it kind of gives you ideas, and like being able to have that like be able to like bounce off like these different ideas and different like techniques that people are using in the field is just always helpful to meet people that are doing something similar to you. And you already have that common ground of human factors. So it's not like you're just walking into a room of strangers with absolutely nothing to talk about. So I say go ahead. If you're considering a concert, you should, not concert, a conference, you should sign up. Obviously post-COVID, but I definitely recommend the conferences.
Conferences and concerts, like them both. All right, so Juliana, tell us about your experiences.
So I have attended the HFES International meeting. So I attended in 2017 and a second time in 2018. And so I would say that conferences are just overall a great way to attain exposure to all of the research that is being conducted. So you definitely do learn a lot from the research alone. However, I feel like there's more to that. So while you're there, you expose yourself to different and just novel ways of thinking. And so as an example, so you may have approached a research question one way, but it's definitely helpful to learn from different approaches and just learn about what other ways people are approaching it. So along with that, I interviewed for Bose at the 2018 conference, and so I can't go without highlighting the importance of these conferences as a means for interviewing with the companies and attaining jobs. So ideally, you would walk out of your interview with a second round interview, but if you don't, these conferences can help you practice interviewing. So again, I did first attain my Bose co-op position while interviewing at an HFES conference. And overall, this has led to many opportunities for growth for me.
Nice, I love that. All right, Danae, tell us about your experiences.
Yeah, I am definitely a proponent of going to conferences and networking. I did that a lot during my grad school, time in grad school, and the first thing that I think was really beneficial for me from it was being able to present in front of people. So I definitely feel that like either writing any kind of like poster or doing any kind of talk, even if it's like a 5-minute talk, like do it as much as you can, because it's going to start to prepare you or give you those skills that you need to kind of like talk to an audience in industry and be able to tell a story with your work. So that was an incredible experience for me to be able to do that pretty much any time that I went to a conference. Secondly was that I met lots of people. So I started to understand what the possibilities were with my degree in human factors. I definitely didn't go in thinking about all the things I could do as like a UX researcher or human factors engineer, like all these different things. I didn't know that until I went to the conferences, talked to people, heard their talks, went to career panels and things like that. So it definitely opened up a whole new world for me. And lastly was just the career panel part of it. The Google X internship that I had started at an HFES international meeting. I think it was in 2014, sometime in Chicago, but it actually wasn't even like a career panel. It was just a talk that one of the researchers was doing there, and happened to just note that like if anybody wanted a job for about a year or whatever, just send her an email, and that was it. So it's one of those things where these small opportunities have such high impact to be able to get your resume seen. And the number one thing that I think I have learned, or at least like the biggest transition in my thinking was that like I don't need to have like the perfect resume. I don't need to focus on competing with other people in that way. The first thing is to get that resume seen. And the way to do that is either like an internal recommendation or knowing somebody, having somebody remember your name, and that be the differentiating factor in this like sea of resumes that are all the same. So yeah, definitely recommend going to conferences.
All right, and Maya, you want to expand on that?
Sure. Sorry, I lost my mouse for a sec. Yeah, so big surprise. I'm also going to recommend that you go to conferences. Shocker. So for me, like I said, my first internship ever I got from a Houston HFES career panel. So after the panel, I went up and I talked to some of the panelists, and I especially connected with the panelist who was there from NASA, Aniko, if you guys remember her. We're still in touch. I talked to her like last week, so we actually are still good friends. I just was messaging with her back and forth, and eventually I asked her if I could maybe come visit the lab and just kind of see what they do and if they have any internships. And that's really how I got my first internship. During that time, I was still looking for other internships, and I was actually sending out applications and stuff like that. But really the best way to get your foot in the door is just to go and talk to people. And conferences and these kind of meetings, they're absolutely the best way for you to meet people who genuinely want to help students. Most people that I've seen, if a student and asks them, hey, I would love your advice, or how did you start out, or what's your day-to-day life look like, they're very willing to help you. So all you have to do is ask. And conferences it's the absolute easiest way for you to approach someone. So that's really my 2 cents on conferences.
All right, and we'll move to Trey.
Okay, so I'm also going to make the recommendation. Rail said conferences are great, but I will say I am very much the HFES diehard here. When I started, we were 2 guys in the closet. If we leaned back, we'd get a headache. Human factors was not a strong suit for us. We had to build our lab from the ground up initially, and HFES was absolutely key to it. I think I've been to 6 conferences, 6 of the international conferences. And one of the things I can say, having interacted with some of the leadership at different components, is they're very interested in students. The fellows are very, very interested in finding you. They will pick freshmen off of the wall to talk about research if they can. So do not think at any point that you're intruding or that you are somehow not welcome. They are super excited to have you. And it's amazing because even Klein, who came up with naturalistic decision making, he's took an hour out of his day to sit down with one of my junior lab members to discuss her research in detail and help her figure out what she wanted to do. He solved problems for her she didn't even know she had. And this is common. These are not strange stories. This is what these conferences are about. I can say I got my job via HFES. But what I can say is that the one, go often, talk to everybody, but 2, mix with the general membership. You're going to get as much out of HFES as you put into it. You have the benefit of this being a really welcoming, really, really brilliant, diverse, just open set of people, and it's one of the best resources I've seen. And I cannot say stringently enough that HFES is a really, really great benefit to everybody. Other conferences I've been to have been more hit or miss, more lukewarm, but I can say we have a very good society, and they are looking forward to you participating. They want you to be able to help out. We have all sorts of wonderful people like Christy and Andy on the local level who try to make this all happen, but it goes all the way up to the top. And so there's room for you to participate and to help out, and there's plenty of professional development and opportunities for everybody. And frankly, we've got more work than we have hands to do it. So don't feel like you're imposing at all.
All right, and Danny?
Well, I honestly don't know what else I could add to that. I did go to conferences. I have presented a couple of times to different conferences, including the annual HFES and HDI International. I do still attend them, and it's honestly one of my favorite professional things to do. So you get to see so many interesting projects and meet really cool people. Like Juliana was saying, you get to know different perspectives or different strategies to answer a research question. I used to see conferences as opportunities to put myself out there, to present, grow my experience, and even my CV. Now I see them a little bit differently now that I have been um, actually working, because I see them as a way of self-actualizing. Obviously, we will see it that way, but what I'm getting at is that now I see them as kind of like, when you cram to an exam. Well, now I see the conferences as opportunities to cram all of the knowledge, that just give them all to me in just a week. Just give it all, or one day, doesn't matter. Just try to get everything, because, well, now you're working and life also happens, and now you don't have as much time to be reading, trying to stay up to date. And these conferences are your opportunity to do all that and to enrich you and your work experience. Plus, you get to find answers to questions that you may have had lingering after experiences that you had at work. So that's all I got. The rest is an echo from everyone else who have, you know, they can tell you more.
No, yeah, I think that's great. I think all those answers really provided like like a clear indication that conferences are great and that we should be attending them frequently for networking, for opening our minds up to new approaches, walking up to people and just telling them, I'm interested in the work that you're interested in. Can you tell me X, Y, and Z? And then most importantly, it's where a lot of jobs and internships happen, which I think is wonderful. And as Trey pointed out, there's more jobs than hands to do so. So that's great for a lot of students that are just coming out of college. So great, I really appreciate those answers. And then another question that I have is, some of you have master's degrees and or PhDs. Some people are transitioning into UX research from different fields. Have you experienced that in your workplace? What do you think you gained by having an advanced degree? And we will start with Maria.
That was kind of a tough one, because I guess I wouldn't be in this field without the advanced degree. I would have been doing something totally different. But I think that by going to the University of Michigan and like just thinking about what I learned there, they were very purposeful in their like the type of learning we did there. And they had a program where you were doing like an internship basically every single semester. Like you had to do a required internship, but then there was also something like basically every single class I was in, we were working with some other like local company on a project. And I don't know if that's like unique to University of Michigan, but that was just something that I felt was so valuable, like was having that hands-on experience. And like, it was very different than my undergraduate studies. Like things that I did in graduate school were like actually for companies, even though they were also like schoolwork projects, versus in my undergraduate, everything was just kind of like for a grade. And like, it didn't have like that weight behind it of being something that I was doing like for like a local library was one of our clients that we did something for. And like, that was just a huge impact, all the research that we did for them. And I think that just having that like real world experience was just a big leg up in understanding like the impact that your work will have, and that it's not just an assignment and it's not just a grade or GPA. It's really like you're really giving someone like an answer to a question in a lot of cases. And I think that it's just really important to take that question seriously and to get as much information like about and background information from that question and really understand what they're asking in terms of research. Like, I think that was definitely something that my master's degree prepared me for was to really take the work seriously and to just recognize that you're working with real money and real people's like jobs in these situations. So that was something that I took away.
Great, awesome. Maya, do you have something?
Yeah, sure. So I will say at least 90% of people that I work with currently on the research org have either masters or PhDs. More than half probably have PhDs. I think almost everyone I work with at NASA had at least a master's or a PhD. There are training programs, at least at Facebook, there's like something called a research associates program where people come in, like if they have like, I have a friend who was working in market research. He had an undergrad degree in business and he was doing market research for a while. And then he went through this program to kind of become trained as a UXR. But the vast majority of people that I work with every day have some sort of an advanced degree. I think kind of like what was mentioned before, it teaches you how to think, and it shows that you can do that kind of work, that you could do that kind of analytical work. That's more than just a grade, that you are capable of this kind of beginning to end critical thinking, critical process and analysis type of thing. So I would suggest like considering at least an advanced degree or potentially one of those paths, like the research associate program that we have at Facebook. I'm sure other companies have a similar training path as well.
All right, Danae, go.
Sure. So I think the first thing that I at least typically notice, at least when like job searching, about the difference of having a degree or not, is that the companies tend to just view it as extra years of experience. So if a job may like require 8 years, then like your PhD will kind of automatically give you an extra 5 or 6 years, or at least like that whole 8-year kind of prerequisite. But outside of that, I will say, kind of like I was saying before, having an advanced degree teaches you how to learn really quickly. And so that is, I cannot tell you how useful that is, because you will have to become an expert on whatever you're researching. And you need to like be able to assimilate all either prior knowledge that people have created for whatever product you're working on or whatever, also building that compendium and learning about this specific thing like drones or robots or whatever. So it's definitely useful in that aspect. Secondly, I feel like my degree came in handy with my ability to have high research rigor when needed. So when I was doing mission critical research on drones, because like you cannot have those falling out of the sky, they just like cannot mess up. These are the kind of studies that help like hold up against FDA, like, or not the FDA, but the FAA, like reviewing your research and making sure that like, oh, you guys actually know your stuff and did your homework before releasing this thing. So the research rigor, the statistics for sure come in handy, because you need that to be able to kind of stand behind your research, but also be able to explain why your research is valid. Even when it comes to just like basic UX research stuff, having that statistical knowledge and letting people know that like, yes, this is something that you can believe in. Here are these like very quantitative things on top of my qualitative study to help show you like, yeah, we have a usability number. This is a thing. So for sure that most of the researchers I work with at Google and across Google have some type of advanced degree, though there are a lot that don't. So I'm starting to kind of see where some of the knowledge gaps happen, but it mostly is in like just the areas that I was telling you about, where like the statistics and being able to kind of like back up your thing and learning quickly. So it's not to say that you cannot do that. And I actually did work with a researcher in my prior job that had no degree at all. He actually just had a high school degree and was one of the finest researchers I've ever worked with. He studied pretty much all the same books that I did during grad school and did all the work as if like he had an advanced degree. So for the most part, I think it does matter for those skills. If you're the type of person who can self-drive yourself to learn these things, then go for it, and don't worry about the degree. It might affect what level of job you may get, entry level versus like maybe a mid to senior level at first glance or whatever. But for the most part, yeah, I think it's totally up to you. But I for sure found extreme value in having it.
That's awesome. All right, and Danny?
Okay, so I have worked with many professionals in completely different fields who conduct some user research. When I say some, I mean that I often see one shortcoming in these professionals. They fail to humanize the interaction between the user and the system. They are great at the methodology, they ask the right questions, but I have seen that quite often they get to the wrong conclusions. For example, I recently worked on the UX of a dashboard. The developers were conducting the user research, and I was brought into the project because they themselves felt something was missing. When I reviewed the research, I realized that it was executed fairly well. They took into account confounding variables, they kept their interviews and context consistent. It was honestly all good, but their conclusions were kind of lacking. So when participants told them that, for example, in one of the during the interviews, that they were getting confused about some metrics in the dashboard, the developers concluded that they needed to add descriptions to the dashboard. They did not question further what was the source of the confusion. And it actually turned out that there was a very similar dashboard out there that was using the same labels for different data. And we were introducing a dashboard that had the same metrics, but differently defined. So it's like telling someone to go buy apples without specifying whether they should be the green or the red ones. The person is very capable of buying the apples for you, but because you didn't specify, then there's a confusion. I know, weird example. Um, but what I'm trying to say is that the advanced degree, and specifically an advanced degree in social sciences, may allow you to know that interaction between the system and the human. It makes the connection, it bridges it, it allows you to kind of not make assumptions, to break those assumptions and try to go behind what they're saying. Oftentimes, I see myself asking rather simple questions during my interviews. It's like asking someone like, why is the internet so important to you? And it may seem obvious at the time for some people, but what I have found oftentimes is that they will go further for you. They will tell you, it is important for me because if not, I cannot be productive. And it's like, okay, well, tell me more about the productivity. And, it's like those simple questions lead to something greater. And you need to ask them. And I think many professionals in different fields are afraid to ask, or not afraid, but refrain from asking these questions because they seem obvious. And I think in our field, there's no such thing as obvious. And we go further and further and further until we actually find the root cause. So I think that's what an advanced degree in in user experience, in human factors gives you. So.
Nice, that's great. And Juliana, we'll go to you next.
So I'm not exactly sure what else to add to everything that's already been said. But I mean, personally, I would say that for me, getting an advanced degree allowed me to essentially just dive deeper into my career interests. So I walked into graduate school with an idea of what I wanted to do in terms of a career. However, it wasn't really clear to me what human factors really was. But over time, I was able to attain a clear understanding of what the field really entails. And the classes that I was taking allowed me to challenged me, and they challenged me to essentially dig deeper into concepts. And this overall helped me grow as a critical thinker, which I believe is a skill that is highly valuable within a workplace. So I would say that that's what getting an advanced degree did for me. And then along with that, given that the classes are more in line with your areas of interest, and therefore you have students that are joining that have those same interests, you get to work with a group of students that are, again, have your same career interests, and therefore I feel like it allowed for a learning environment that was one in which you could help and then seek the help of fellow classmates when it was necessary, which, I mean, for me, I would say made an overall great graduate experience.
All right, and Trey, do you have anything that you want to second or add to that?
Actually, what I would say is that I contrast with one of the comments earlier about the differences between PhD and undergrad. Because in my undergrad, I did a bunch of outside project work. I did a bunch of stuff that was professional focused. I was built on those sort of things. PhD ended up being a case of learning to solve my own problems and learning to get to focus on my particular area pretty aggressively. And that's the thing that's worth noting, is that undergrad, you're on rails, you're doing this you're doing the stuff they tell you to do. They've got a very controlled basis. PhD, they throw you out of the plane, you land in the water, they tell you, we'll see you when you get to shore. You have to carve your way out. And sometimes that means carving into other disciplines, saying, what's here that's useful that I need to take back with me? I brought a bag. And learning to do that, especially in human factors. You learn to drop into HCI or anthropology and be like, hi, I'm in human factors. I'm here to take all your research methods. What's human factors? Good question. So that was kind of what I learned from a lot of it. One of the things that I'd also say too about graduate school versus undergraduate, teaching does not get enough respect. Everybody talks about academia like it's all this big difference, but how are you supposed to be, how is user research that different from teaching if your students don't know anything yet? If they're confused and they don't understand why this is important, they have to be able to figure out how to make it work. They're a difficult stakeholder. Learning to teach people things really does make you better at understanding why you're doing it. It helps you learn it for its own purpose instead of just grades, right? For your own pursuit. And I think that however you have to go about it, learning to pursue mastery of the field is extremely important, and pursue it for its own sake rather than somebody else's approval or somebody else's structure. But in the end, what I would also say too is it depends, whether or not you pursue an advanced degree and the kind of advanced degree depends on the kind of work you want to do. In my case, I'm doing a lot of mission critical human factors, hard-edged research, so rigor is very important. Everybody in my department has a doctorate. We don't hire master students because we're doing the kind of stuff in lab that, you know, you guys usually want to get nice equipment for and be very, very rigorous with, because we have to sell it to governments. We have to sell it to regulators. That's a big part of the work we do. So what I would say is think about it from that perspective. But by the end of the day, what I say the most useful thing is draw down what you want to have skill-wise to do your job. Find somebody who's doing your job and think of two things. One, what does it take to be qualified to do the job? What are your basic skills? But two, what does it take to be unfireable? What does it take to be the kind of person who just absolutely rocks that job? and figure out who's going to teach it to you. If that's an upper level degree, that's an upper level degree. If you can get it at work, get it at work. But it's really not one size fits all. And I think that's the most important thing to remember is different programs have different emphases. The fact that we can both have two different undergraduates and have two completely different experiences, you have to decide whether or not you're learning the things that you need to learn. But by the end of the day, an upper level degree lets you pursue things that are very focused on what you want to do, and in some ways makes you responsible for pursuing those things directly. And that's the real strength you can bring with yourself going into work as opposed to somebody who's just coming from an undergraduate, because you've had to dig yourself out. The fact that you finish a PhD is important, for instance, because they don't hand those things out. They're not gonna, people aren't gonna push you through. You have to push yourself. And the skills, those same skills you learn to do it are extremely important professionally.
That's awesome. I think all those responses are awesome. Grad school is important, you know, because it challenges us to ask questions that separates a good researcher from like the most optimal researcher, right? Using that critical thinking to challenge what we think we know, and then also like getting an upper level degree allows us to kind of better articulate like what we're trying to say, and I think that really is a good skill to have, especially, you know, with the wide range of job opportunities that we have, and like we said earlier, speaking to different people. So I think that these are all great. And then just to let everybody know, we should be wrapping up around 8. So if you have a question for our lovely panel, go ahead and drop it in that chat, and we'll address it whenever we finish this last question. So my final question to you is, entering the business world is very different from being a student. What would you tell your graduating self to be prepared for business? And we will start with Danae.
Yay, okay. Sorry, I was like, what is this? So, oh my God. Hold on, sorry, I'm having like a technical difficulty. Can we come back to me really quick?
Yeah.
Later. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we'll go to Danny.
All right, so I think I will tell myself to be prepared for business culture. I still struggle with explaining my research in layman's terms without oversimplifying it, and also doing so in a few sentences. So something that I can just say in the elevator for 20 seconds. If I could go back in time, I will make myself explain my research to my grandma, who has no idea what user experience is or what my job is exactly, and she doesn't want to hear about it. So I will definitely use her as my audience. Also, I will tell myself to focus on results rather than on the methods. I tend to get very excited about data collection and the methodology of research, but that's not what my stakeholders want to know. They want the results, what you found and what you recommend and how that's going to be of value. So I think that's the biggest thing I wish I was more proactive in getting prepared for when I got into industry.
Okay. And Maya?
Yeah, so I think for me, what I would tell myself is to be more daring and be more bold. Because I think when you're a student, the way that you disseminate your research is at conferences, or you write a paper and everybody reads it and then they might like email you about it, right? But in the business world, you have to advocate for your own research, right? Like you can't just put out a report and expect people to read it and act on it. So I think it really is about, and I'm an introvert, so this is not something that comes naturally to me, but it is about kind of gathering your courage up and speaking up and telling everybody about this amazing research that you just did that they have to implement right now into the product because it would make it so much better. So kind of learning to self-advocate and going out and talking to people and really kind of pushing your results and your recommendations yourself is something that was so different from the way that, at least, you know, again, for me, it was a very academic, very traditional kind of situation in grad school. So that's kind of where I would say I would give myself advice, is to self-advocate, to get out of your comfort zone and go talk to people and talk to everyone and talk to them again and again and again, because they're getting talked to from a bunch of different people. And if they hear your research 3 times, they are much more likely to act on it than if they just hear about it once or read about it in a report. So that would definitely be my advice to my past self.
All right, and Danae, we'll come back to you.
Yay, sorry about that. My speaker was like going nuts, so I had to fix it very quickly. Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Maya was saying. It's just like, you have to be able to like advocate for yourself, and research activation is so important. It's actually like what I call like kind of the one of the largest parts that you can do for as being a UX researcher, at least. Is landing that research, because what is the point of doing it if nobody's going to use it? You've essentially just wasted your time, company money, like everything, if people aren't going to act on it. And secondly is, this is going to sound horrible, but I feel like those in industry definitely will know this, especially you at Facebook, but you kind of have to grow a tough skin, like a thick skin, like presenting, and you're going to have people in your face and challenging you every step of the way. And for some people, you and their team, you're their biggest enemy, because you're literally crapping on their baby, you know? So like, it's really hard. And so one of the things that like I really wish I would have picked up in school was what I call leadership by influence. And so that means like being able to somehow tell somebody they have an ugly baby, but in the most polite way possible, and like, this is how we can fix it, kind of thing. So they're not hating you, so they actually feel that you are helping them make a better product or feature, or safer product or feature. But yeah, my first few years in industry were really hard, because I just felt like everybody was attacking me or against me, or, you know, it's really easy to just be like, oh, they're all dumb, like they don't have this degree, like they don't get it. But none of that is true. It's just, you need to be able to stand up for yourself and stand behind your research and be able to activate said research.
That's great. Trey, what would you tell your graduating self?
One of the things I would say actually is I talk about imposter syndrome, because the thing that's important to remember is everybody thinks that everybody else is actually doing this well, that everybody else has a better looking resume, that everybody else has had a chance to pursue things in a more optimal way, and that you're somehow behind. But the thing I would put forward is, even in the way we talk about industry versus academia, there's this kind of awkward self-doubt that gets into all of this. But what I would actually say is that coming into industry from academia, we're almost too obsessed with ethos. We're too obsessed with our own credibility, with being seen as responsible, with being seen as credible. But in all honesty, what I would say is, you see your own flaws. You see your own lack of rigor. You see every wart and step that you wish you could do, everything you wish you could improve on that you just don't have the time or energy or creative potential to do right now. Everybody else doesn't see that. And when you spend all your time thinking about it and being uncomfortable about it, you point it out to everybody else. So instead, what I would say is, you really want to focus on telling your story, telling about why it matters, why it impacts, trying to sell that point across, you know, the research translation. Bring it to your stakeholders in language they understand and lean on that. Don't focus on it. Basically, you tell them something that's important, you tell them something that they learn, and they go, oh, wow, this is great. I learned something useful. You're credible. They don't go, oh, you're credible. Now I'm going to listen to you. And, you know, so don't worry about that. But that's really what I would say identified with me from Danae and Maya's comments on that. It's just being more bold is really about leading with the tip of the spear. Talk about where it hits people, where they care about it, and worry about less, make your mistakes loudly and upfront, and worry less about how you look about it and what your actual credibility is. Only focus on your credibility when somebody challenges it directly. They will. Don't worry about it. Just don't do the work for them.
All right, and Maria, what would you tell your graduating self?
So I guess I'm kind of thinking more about like that transition period, like when I was first out of grad school and looking for a job and not finding one. And I was kind of thinking like, wow, like what have I done? Like I went through this whole degree, I've done all this schooling and I can't find a job. And it wasn't even like the not finding a job. I just think it was all that downtime. And basically it was after like a month or two that I decided I just needed to find my own project to work on. So my advice to myself would just be to like get busy like as soon as you're graduated. Like if you're not finding a job, don't just like use that time to chill. Like use that time to like find like some company, like some nonprofit that needs help or something, someone you can do work for in the meantime that you can still have something to talk about when you do have interviews. So for me, I ended up working for this company, Minorities to Majorities. It's like they're working to get like scholarships and internship programs for people that are looking for these programs. And so I was helping them like look at how their app worked and doing like different studies with people and sending out surveys and just kind of like doing all these different things I could do for them with that small budget. And I just thought that was kind of a cool experience for me, and it made me feel like useful again. And when I finally did get interviews, I felt like I actually had something to talk about, and I wasn't just pulling on these experiences that were like now so far in the past as I got further and further away from school. So if you're not finding something, my advice is just do something yourself. Like don't just sit around and wait for something to come to you. Don't wait for the absolute best, perfect thing. If you're not finding it, just do something in the meantime. So that's my advice.
All right, and Juliana, what's something you would tell your graduating self?
I would say that I'd tell my graduating self to be prepared for a decrease in structure. So as a student, you're presented with assignments and projects that are meant to prepare you. And so everything is structured for you. So essentially what you need to be successful in the classroom is always pretty clear. And so I would say professors can only do so much. Professors don't know what organization you're going to be working for or what that organization will expect out of you. So every organization is different. So that's when it's up to you essentially to take the time to understand your organization. So take the time to understand the people, the work, and how the work is delegated. And of course, you'll have colleagues that are going to help along the way, but it's important that you take the initiative. So it'll take time, but once you do have a better understanding of the organization, you begin to pick up on the skills that you have, and then you pick up on skills that you know will make you a more competent employee. So I would say that I would tell myself to essentially be ready for a decrease in structure.
All right, and Danny, what would you tell your graduating self?
I have to be, I just have to second on Juliana, honestly, because during school, I was doing research projects, and you know, you always have a structure on how to do it. And in the industry, it's just so different. You just have to be ready for anything, pretty much. I have been brought to projects at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. And you have to be ready for any of those. You have to be also ready for when things have to be so quickly delivered that you just have to realize when it's good enough. You know, sometimes there's no need for a very rigorous research project because it's something small or it's something that has been researched in the past but needs kind of a validation or confirmation, and sometimes those things need to go fast. So you lose that structure that Julie was also mentioning. It's like sometimes it's just not there, and you just have to know when it's good enough. But at the same time, just trying to keep the validity of your research as intact as possible. So yeah, I will advise myself to not to be more flexible, to not allow myself to get fixated on what's perfect. You just sometimes you just have to do it. So yeah.
All right, and I know we're running close on time, so I do have a few questions. So panelists, if one of you has a response to one of these questions, feel free to unmute your mic, and I guess it'll be a first come, first serve to answer. One of our questions is, given that a graduate degree allows me to do specific work, does this mean I will be stuck doing work related to my dissertation or thesis? How can one switch industries in HF? For example, from industry UX to something more safety focused?
So I actually have a lot of experience in the switching because, like I mentioned before, my graduate degree has absolutely nothing to do with UX or human factors or anything like that. So just because you're studying a particular domain absolutely does not mean that you're stuck doing research in that domain. That's absolutely been my experience. It just means that you have to work a little bit harder to make those connections outside of your niche knowledge area, right? So I had to go out and meet people who are in human factors and UX because I had no connections that were related to my graduate degree. But like we mentioned before, having a PhD or having a master's, it's almost an exercise to show that you can do it. And then you can apply those skills elsewhere. So absolutely, I wouldn't be concerned about like the topic area, especially like from my own experience, I do nothing that's related to my area of study. I also then moved from human factors in NASA, which is very much like safety oriented, to UX research at Facebook. Has like not a whole lot to do with safety. So again, I was able to make that transition because the methods are the same. You know, like if you know how to write surveys, if you know how to do statistics are statistics everywhere. Interviewing is interviewing everywhere. So when you have that basis of the methods, you can actually apply them to a bunch of different areas. So I actually went through two transitions, right? Like from my graduate degree to human factors to UX. It's a little bit different in communication style, but the methods are the same and you can definitely do it.
I would also add, by the way, if you've ever looked at the Human Factors Journal, look at the back page of it, right? They say the things that they're interested in. It takes the entire page and they still don't cover everything. What I would say is even if you look at the researchers that are these top tier folks, they work in 8 different fields. Don't think of your PhD, even if you did a PhD, which is some of the most specified, very narrow basis. Human factors is highly generalist. I often joke that we are, in some ways, our biggest skill set is we are the most professional student areas out there. We have to learn to get good at everything because one day you're working with an anesthetist, the other day you're working with pilots. You'll never be both of those things at the same time, but you still have to be able to do research to help them. So what I would say is that the number of people who are domain constrained is more the exception than the rule, and that's because they really like doing one specific thing. On the whole, the big appeal for human factors is that wide variety. So I'd say don't even be worried about it.
All right. As someone new in your organization, have you found yourself doing more exploratory or evaluative research?
I guess I could go. So I joined YouTube gaming last May, so still relatively new. But for any job, it all depends on what the problem at hand is, for me at least. So I find myself doing a bit of both, but right where my team was a couple months ago, I felt that like they really needed a lot of kind of foundational research. So I didn't do a lot of evaluative because I didn't see a lot of value in there. Excuse the terminology, but sometimes I feel like the doing a lot of evaluative is, what do they call it, like polishing the turd. So they needed a lot more guidance on what they actually should be building and what we actually should be doing. And so that's more of the exploratory research, foundational stuff than it is evaluative. However, like with my time at Google X, like some of the most critical things I did were evaluative because I needed to make sure that this was an easy to use system, or that somebody who's doing air traffic control with like thousands of drones in the sky versus what generally is done with a regular like air traffic control for pilots. If that, like evaluating the usability of that is like very critical. So like that is the thing that we needed to do. So yeah, it very, very much depends on what the problem is that you're trying to solve and where your team is at and what you're trying to do. So I don't think that there's no like easy answer for that.
All right, and then I just have one more question. This is actually a question for Maya. How was your HF design engineering role different from your role at Facebook? Which role do you prefer and why?
They are so different. Oh my God. But I think that has more to do with working for government and working for tech than the factors and UX research. Because again, like the methods are the same, you know, statistics are the same. So it really is more about the environment, the jargon, the communication style, the speed of things. I mean, that's kind of where the gaps are. So it's not so much human factors to UXR, it's more government to tech. And they're like on complete opposite sides of the spectrum. Like it's kind of nuts. So I actually really, really love working in tech because it's super high pace. It's fast paced. Like like at NASA, we would have projects that are 3 years long. When I was leaving, we were actually gearing up for a 7-year-long project. Whereas at Facebook, most of our projects are like a month, 2 months. Maybe you have a project that lasts through the half. Like you actually time in quarters, right? So Q1, Q2, Q3. What did I do in each quarter? So to get used to that pace is definitely an adjustment. I actually prefer that because you do something in Q1 and then you open the app in Q3 and you see the thing that you researched and this is your recommendation and they did it and it's so cool. So that's really where I would say the difference is. It's not so much the human factors in UXR. It's government versus tech.
All right, and I think that kind of wraps up our session for today. Christy, I don't know if you want to take over.
Hey everyone, I just want to say that that was awesome. I was really impressed. I think we got such a great amount of information. There are a couple of little questions in the chat. If you guys have a minute, you can just type a few answers in, but I do want to be respectful of your time. I know some people have had to jump out because we're coming a little past the 8 o'clock mark. So again, I just want to thank you. I think everybody did a great job. Tyler, great job moderating. Thank you very much. And like, hey, for all the panelists, I really appreciate you. And if I put some information in the very beginning of the chat about places you can look at to follow Houston HFES, if you want to hear more about what we're doing. And given the way things are, we may be having more virtual events. So, check us out on Twitter or whatever. And I think that's all. I really appreciate it, everyone. Andy, do you have anything to wrap up with?
No, nothing from me.
Okay. All right. Again, thank you very much, everybody. Take a look at the comments. You're getting a lot of nicely done and good jobs.